South African CSGO teams have never really had the luxury of long-term consistent coaches, and when we look at the international scene, it's certainly been one of the catalysts of success of certain teams because of how fantastic their coaches have been and how much they've brought to the table, how quickly they've aided the development of the certain teams as well. So I think it's definitely something the South African scene has been lacking for a number of years, but finally we've reached a point where we're starting to solve the South African CSGO coaching drought, which has actually, in my opinion, significantly hindered and stunted the growth of the South African scene, in particular the up-and-coming teams who are still developing and trying to identify an image for themselves and how they want to be approaching the game. It's been for a number of reasons that we haven't really had coaches in the local scene, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's definitely something that has affected the South African CSGO team, is that we have not had, or the CSGO scene is that we have not had long-term consistent coaches. So, let's talk a little bit about the past and present coaches from a local perspective. The first two people to sort of make coaching popular in South Africa, or not even popular, but to sort of take on the roles full time, were TC for Bravado towards the end of 2016, and Spoof for Carbon, who had a stint with them as well in 2016. Of course, TC was coaching the likes of Detrony, Deviant. I'm not exactly sure what the roster was at the time. Sonic was in that team as well, I'm sure. It was before JT and Fady had joined them. Of course, Elusive was a part of the mix. So TC was coaching that team after he had transitioned from a full-time player, one of the most successful IGLs in South African CS. Of course, a studying doctor at the time as well, now a fully qualified doctor, so certainly had the brains behind what was necessary to be a coach. And he was one of the people who picked it up full-time first, and you could immediately see the impact that it had on Bravado. Even though they were already South African beaters, they were like by far the best team in the country, it even elevated them to that next level, made them really tough to predict, and just brought a whole new element of depth to their game. And Spoof also worked really closely with that Carbon roster that had the likes of Flexi, JT, Fady, Makmu at one stage. They brought Domster in as well not too long after that. And they were the one team that could actually beat Bravado or go toe-to-toe with them. Outside of that, there wasn't really anybody else in the local CS that could. And I wonder if it's because they also had a coach. Definitely the firepower was there, but the coaching of Spoof definitely would have given that experience to a roster which was already fairly inexperienced, but like I said, had that firepower. So, as far as I know, those were the first two people who sort of took up the role of coaching full-time. From there, of course, in end of 2017, Bravado went overseas, where so TC took his services to America with them, and Spoof didn't really get back into the coaching thing, if I'm not mistaken, after that Carbon roster had disbanded. So we went back into a bit of a lull through 2017 and 18, where we never really had any mainstream coaches. There were a few guys who like did the hype for a few teams and like were there to give them motivation, but we never really had any of those structural Counter-Strike orientated coaches to add to the depth of that side of the game. So through 2018 we go into the year, and Maniac was one of the first people to become a full-time coach again. He was working with Big Five for what seemed like quite a long time. I mean, it must have been at least over a year that he was working with the Big Five team, committed to the coaching role, and definitely helped them with their structure. Definitely not like he was motivational, but his what he contributed to the team was far more on a structural basis than it was on a motivational basis. And he certainly must have had a good relationship because they stayed together for so long. Had a lot of number twos. They placed second a lot with that roster as well. You know, Comic-Con 2018 and 2019. I think he was a part of both of those teams. They reached the final but didn't get across the line, unfortunately. And a couple other notable events as well. So Lighters is another coach who also had been working with a local team, of course, Goliath Gaming being that team. He did some work with the ATK female team as well, but he's also one of the people who who got into that coaching realm after he retired from being a player. Now he heads up the general manager role for Goliath Gaming, not really doing anything from the coaching department. And currently we have Ninjask working for Energy Esports, who I've actually just like got information that he's not part of the active team anymore, because he wants to be a player, which I'll get into a little bit more because it really plays into the narrative of this video. And then you got BNY Bunny, who's working with DNMK, and apparently he's more of a hype man and the motivational side of things, and he makes sure everybody is mentally in check. He can resolve conflicts as well, which is another really important aspect of the coach, because of course he's got that third person perspective where he can look at issues from a different angle and try and help the team resolve any problems. So that's BNY's contribution to DNMK. So that's sort of the local coaches we've had past and present in the South African scene. Now, what are the reasons that we've had such a lack of coaches in the scene over the years? I mean, you look internationally, you have outright hard coaches who have literally, they may not even have been necessarily successful at the game throughout their career, but still they're able to take on that coaching role and do such a fantastic job. So why don't we have that in South Africa? What are we lacking? And first and foremost, I think one of the big problems is that in South Africa, everybody wants to be a player. That's the bottom line. Everyone wants to be a star. Everybody wants to be that player in the South African scene who maybe can go overseas or whatever. But the point is that everyone wants to play. No one wants to consider the ulterior options of maybe shifting into that coach role and learning how to be a really good coach and take that to a team, which I feel like in South Africa is a niche market at the moment that people could look to exploit and get in touch with, because there are these opportunities around right now. You have teams like Sinister 5 who don't have a coach, Energy right now, Goliath Gaming of course have just released Bunter recently. So like there are the top teams in South Africa who don't have coaches, and those roles could be filled by local people if they went and took the time to learn how to be an impactful coach. So that's the first reason, is that everybody wants to be a player. The second reason is the sheer size of our community. Like I said, when you look at the international scene, you have individuals who are out and out coaches and are just good at what they do. They're really good at understanding the game. Mechanically, they're not very amazing, but their understanding of the game is second to none. You think of Hunden, for example, God Hunden, who was always, questionable with his mechanical ability, but his understanding of the game was incredible. And now that is the strength he's tapping into, right, as the coach of Heroic. And look at how successful they're being. Yeah, these individuals, from a Danish perspective, they've always been solid, but you wouldn't consider them world beaters. They're now currently number 2 in the world, and last night just beat Astralis with a convincing 2-0. Yes, it's on top of their individual ability, but Hunden's allowed them to elevate their game to the next level. He's added that extra element, and I have no doubt that that's one of the main catalysts of this team's success. So therein alone lies a great example of how impactful a coach can actually be when he's got that understanding of that game and he's got that ability to read the game so well. So I feel like in South Africa, the sheer size of the community is something that definitely lets us down. We don't have the volume, the numbers where we just cover all bases, right? General managers, another thing in South Africa, which aren't incredibly prevalent. Like I said, Lighters is one of the very few in South Africa who's actually a noticeable name, or like a name you'll recognize in the CS scene. So I think the sheer size definitely lets us down in that regard. Another thing which is really important to look at is often coaches are players who have transitioned into a coach after they've gotten a little bit older and they can't really keep up with the youngsters in the scene anymore, but that mental side of the game is still super prevalent, and they have all the ins and outs and the know-how of Counter-Strike and the team and the experience, right? Now in South Africa, when players reach that stage in their career, if they don't have like a full-time job sort of thing, or if they haven't, been studying and got the degree to get the job, often that's when players are like, damn, time for me to sort of move on. Don't really have time to commit full-time to CS anymore because I've got other real-life priorities that are knocking on the door that need to be dealt with. So that's another really big problem, is that you have these players who get super experienced and they reach the point where they would be really good coaches, but they just don't have the time anymore because of the past few years they've been playing CS, and unfortunately it hasn't really gotten to where they would hoped, and like making a full-time income off of it, which nobody's doing in South Africa at the moment. So that's another really big problem, is like, even though we do have some experienced players who have shifted through the scene over the years, they aren't capable of committing full-time to that coaching role because they have other priorities that they need to deal with. So that's definitely something that's hindered the coaching scene in South Africa. And lastly, one of the big things I think is that we've often been criticized for our lack of structure in the Counter-Strike teams. You know, when you compare a CSGO team locally to internationally, often when players go play overseas and they come back, the first thing they say is like, we're just lacking structure drastically in comparison to them. And I think you really need a structured team if you're going to be allowing a coach to thrive, because you give him the keys to the palace and you give him something to work with, right? If you're just playing a super puggy style where you're running around and tapping heads, yeah, it looks pretty, but how much impact can a coach really have in that regard? So I think the lack of structure alone has sort of negated the impact that coaches can have, and is definitely something that is changing with the times. And we're starting to reach a point now where we're seeing that structure coming and being integrated into our teams, not just at the top level, but even in the teams below there. You can see that structure's become a big feature of their game, and definitely something which has allowed coaches to have more of an impact. So those are the reasons that I think that coaches have generally, we've had a lack of coaches in South African CS. Question is, how have we solved this drought? What has changed? And the answer is that we now have tapped into international coaches. Over the past few months, we've had 4 international coaches that I know of that have been working with local Counter-Strike teams. And that has been one of the resounding facts which has allowed coaches to tap into the South African scene, is that we are now reaching into that international pool and going further than just our borders. We can employ international coaches, right? Because the ping doesn't really matter. Yeah, with players, it's a completely different story because of the ping issue. But with a coach, they don't need to have that super low ping. So looking overseas, abroad is certainly an option, right? So that's one of the main reasons as to how we've been able to solve the coaching drought. Currently, we have 4, like I said, international coaches who have been working or are currently working with local teams. The first one is sprayxd, who's been working with ATK for actually a while now. If I'm not mistaken, he did some work with the previous ATK team that was in America at the end of last year, beginning of this year. And he's currently working with the current iteration of the ATK team as well. You know, the team led by Mistim, Slowy, Fady, Blaze, and of course Doru. And he's working very closely with them, and he's a large factor for their success as well, bringing a huge amount of discipline and composure to the team. Chatted to them a number of times, and they very often speak highly of Spray and what an impact he has on the team. When you just look at those individuals, not much experience behind them, but Spray, he has got that experience. He's worked with a lot of teams internationally, and he knows what it takes to be a top tier team. So he brings so much to that ATK team, which you wouldn't have someone in the South African scene who's capable of doing that. So that they've solved that problem by going overseas. Spray's from Israel, for anybody who aren't familiar, and he's been working with the team for a while now. So that's one of the international coaches. Another one is Matthew David, who has worked and is still working with the Royalty Esports team. He's one of the coaches who's also had a huge impact on the South African scene. When you look at Royalty and the success that they've had over the past few months, it has to speak volumes as to what an impact he's had, right? You look at the individuals on that Royalty team, they've got firepower, no doubt about that, but then you look at the structure that they've been approaching their game with, and that's what's really impressed me and most other people as well. And that's definitely coming partly from the impact that they've had from this international coach. So there we go, another story of success with the international coaching endeavor. Another one, Bobbytux, working with NiBBLE Conspire. He's been one of the coaches that's also allowed this team to elevate their game to the next level. You can see that when they're approaching it, they're trying to integrate more structure into their game. And you can see that's why they've been having the results that they have. They're starting to take names, make progress, turn heads. Again, international coach. No coincidence. This is definitely one of the reasons that this NiBBLE team have been able to reach that next level of their game and add that extra depth. There's no doubt in my mind about it. And then lastly, the one coach or analyst who had been working with the local team was Bunter, and he had been a part of the Goliath Gaming CSGO team up until the other day when he announced he wasn't going to be working with them anymore. But he certainly had been a part of that team, and it's really awesome to see organizations reaching overseas, spending the money to get these coaches they're investing in their CSGO teams by bringing these coaches into the mix, right? all 4 of these coaches are costing the orgs a pretty penny. Some of them are working off of a year-long contracts and being paid a salary while taking home a percentage of the winnings. Some of them are being paid per hour. You can even go on websites like Fiverr and you can find international coaches who have got experience and you can pay them there. Some of these coaches are working on a month-to-month basis where you can hire them for an entirety of a month and you pay 20,000 Rand, for example. These are the types of funds that these teams are spending on their coaches. It's big money, guys. It's not just like they've got a little bit of spare pocket change. These orgs are investing money into their CSGO teams in the way of bringing international coaches into the mix. And on all 4 of these occasions, it has elevated their game and it's improved their stock. So I think it's an amazing investment to see South African teams making. Instead of maybe like, you know, there's other ways that you could spend the money as well. You could give salaries to your players. You could give them extra pay incentives. You could maybe buy them some hardware or something like that. But I feel like this is one of the best long-term investments you can make in your CSGO team. And the results are already there with the teams who have made the plunge and have spent the money. The results have shown. Royalty got that amazing placement at the ROG Soldiers of Fortune event recently where they beat Sinister 5 and they beat, or not Sinister 5, they beat Energy and they beat... damn, there was another team I can't remember right now that they managed to get the best of, and it was a really impressive result. It might even have been like DNMK. Excuse my lack of memory there. Anyway, the point being that they had that awesome run, and now people are starting to take note of them. If you've got the money as an org, I fully suggest that you decide to invest in an international coach. Like I said, there's multiple avenues that you can go down. You know, paying them hourly, paying them monthly. You don't have to make the long-term commitments. Yes, it's expensive, but I 100% think that it's a worthy investment to make and that it's a team or a route that teams should be going down.